Night in the White House has a special sound. It's not just silence, it's dense, almost tangible, as if filled with the echo of other people's voices, long since quiet but not gone. Where life is in full swing during the day, advisors are walking, journalists are speaking, and phones are ringing. At night, there are only long corridors, the soft light of desk lamps and footsteps. Footsteps that sometimes don't belong to anyone. It was 1941. The world was burning. War was raging across Europe. Cities were being reduced to rubble. The skies above London were lit up by flashes of German bombs. But that night, all was quiet. Here in Washington, across the ocean, in the residence of the U.S. president, the silence seemed almost unbelievable. It was within these walls that Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, a man with a cigar in his teeth, a heavy gaze and an unbending will, had come. He had come to discuss the fate of the world with Franklin Roosevelt. That evening, he worked late in his room, the guest suite on the second floor of the White House. His desk was piled high with papers, a cigar was smoking nearby, and a glass of amber cognac was gleaming. Churchill liked to work at night, but that night he decided to take a break. A hot bath seemed like a great idea, to relieve his fatigue, to calm his thoughts before going to bed. The water felt pleasant on his body. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and allowed himself a few minutes of peace. But the silence behind the bathroom door seemed to change. He couldn't understand whether it was his imagination or whether someone had actually passed in the hallway. Footsteps, or had the old floorboards simply given in under the weight of the night wind? Churchill got out of the bath, put on his bathrobe, leaving it slightly open, the way he usually walked around, not caring about propriety in a private setting. He picked up a glass of cognac and headed for the living room. And the moment he opened the door, time seemed to stop. There was a figure standing by the fireplace, tall, in a black tailcoat with the usual top hat in his hands. The face was pale, serious, with sad eyes. Churchill froze, but not from fear, rather from surprise. He recognized him immediately. The same Lincoln whose portrait hung in every classroom, whose speeches were quoted by school children, whose history was woven into the very fabric of the American nation. But he couldn't be here. Lincoln had been dead for more than 70 years. For a few seconds, they simply looked at each other. Churchill, without losing his composure, took a sip of cognac, raised his glass and said, "Good evening, sir. I assume you are the owner of this house?" The figure nodded slightly, and then it disappeared. It didn't dissolve into smoke. It didn't move away. It simply became transparent, like a reflection in water, and disappeared, leaving only a slight feeling of cold in the air. Churchill stood motionless for a few moments. Then he slowly placed his glass on the table, sat down in a chair, and lit a cigar. He had seen a lot in his life: war, destruction, death. But this was something else. He couldn't sleep at night, and one thought was spinning in his head. Why did Lincoln appear to him? On that December night in 1941, the White House was nearly empty. President Roosevelt was already asleep. Guards and servants were quietly on duty at their posts. The corridors were bathed in the soft light of antique sconces. But for Churchill, this house was no longer just a diplomatic residence. It had become something more. A place where the walls seemed to remember everything that had happened within them over the centuries. Churchill was not one to believe in ghosts. He was a man of common sense, hardened by political storms and war. But Lincoln was for him a symbol of courage and determination. And yet to stand face to face with his pale figure, to feel the indescribable chill in the air, to see that sad look, it was not like a dream or a hallucination. The White House has always been a place where history seems to linger. Resident staffers tell stories of strange sounds in the night, of quiet footsteps in the hallways, of doors that close by themselves. But no spirit has been as famous as Abraham Lincoln's. His appearance was described by many. Calvin Coolidge, the 30th President of the United States, said that his wife once saw Lincoln sitting in a chair by the Oval Office window, looking thoughtfully. Eleanor Roosevelt said that she felt his presence when she worked in the Lincoln Room. Even the Queen of the Netherlands, who was visiting the White House, claimed that someone knocked on her door at night, and when she opened it, Lincoln was standing there. But perhaps the most famous story was not theirs, but Churchill's. December 1941 was one of the darkest months in the history of the 20th century. Just weeks earlier, the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had dragged the United States into World War II. Britain had been on the brink of survival for 2 years, under daily bombardment by the Luftwaffe. Churchill had come to Washington not just to visit, he had come to plead for help. He and Roosevelt spent hours behind closed doors, discussing military plans, resource allocation, and the future of the world. But that night, after his encounter with the ghost, a strange thought entered Churchill's mind. What if this house really held more than walls and memories? What if it could convey not just history, but the will of those who made it? The next day, Churchill did not tell Roosevelt about the night visit. He was too pragmatic to share such things during important negotiations. But in the evening, returning to his apartment, he felt a slight uneasiness all the time, as if someone was walking somewhere behind his back. On the third day of his visit, he asked his secretary to show him the Lincoln Room. It was a small but atmospheric room where, according to legend, Lincoln often wrote his speeches. A table covered with green baize, an armchair by the fireplace, a portrait on the wall. Churchill approached the table and ran his hand over the wood. He did not know what he was looking for, perhaps a sense of presence. And it was, not as a vision, not as a sound, but as a strange heaviness in the air. There are many theories as to why Lincoln's ghost appears precisely during difficult periods in history. Some believe that he returns at moments when the country is on the brink of a fateful choice. Others are sure that this is simply a psychological effect caused by the atmosphere of the White House and the consciousness of people under enormous pressure. But for Churchill, it was different. He took the incident as a sign that the U.S. and Britain must join forces at any cost. And when he met Roosevelt again, he spoke no longer as a politician, but as a man who had received a strange but profound confirmation that he was on the right track. In the years that followed, many people claimed to have seen Lincoln. Lady Bird Johnson, wife of President Lyndon Johnson, claimed to have heard footsteps and a soft knock on the door when she was alone in the White House. Harry Truman wrote in his diary that he woke up at night with the feeling that someone was in his bedroom. But of all these stories, it was Churchill's story that remained the most famous. Perhaps because he was not inclined to mysticism, he did not seek to meet spirits, and that is why his words sounded especially convincing. Paranormal investigators believe that the White House is one of the most haunted places in the world, but Lincoln is special. He was the man who led the country through its bloodiest conflict, the Civil War. He died tragically, killed in the prime of his life, and perhaps it is this unfinished business of his life that keeps his spirit coming back. That winter of 1941, Churchill might have thought it was just fatigue and stress. But deep down he knew. He saw Lincoln, not a portrait, not a trick of the light, but the very man who had once saved his country. And perhaps that is why Lincoln still roams these halls. Not to frighten, not to haunt, but to guide. To remind those in power that history is watching them, just as he once watched a nation torn apart. Imagine for a moment the shadowed hallways of the White House after midnight, the distant tick-tock of an old clock, the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, echoing across the marble floors. You turn the corner, and there he is, tall, solemn, dressed in black, his deep-set eyes looking straight at you. He doesn't speak. He doesn't need to. Because in that single look, you understand everything. That's the power of stories like these. They remind us that history isn't just words in dusty books. It breathes, it lingers, and sometimes, if we're quiet enough, it speaks. So the next time you hear the floor creak when you're alone, the next time you feel the air getting colder for no reason, ask yourself, is it really just your imagination? Or could it be that the past has decided to visit you? If you enjoyed this journey into one of the White House's most mysterious meetings, don't let it end here. Hit the like button because it tells me you want more unknown stories. Subscribe to Forgotten Archives to keep up with the next mystery waiting in the shadows. And most importantly, leave a comment. Tell me, do you believe Churchill saw Lincoln that night? Or do you think it was all in his imagination? I read all your theories, and who knows? Maybe one day your comment will inspire the next story that we will uncover together.